try to figure out, um, how do we get over this hump of getting to the next level and eventually winning this thing.
It's a great question, and I would have paid $1,000 to hear Bill Parcells' answer. I mean, I would have absolutely loved it because we're going to
That's like
spend
a third of your salary.
cut him off. Just pot him down. Go back to doing whatever you're doing in Omaha. Stop it.
But for you, that'd still be worth it,
Come
though.
on.
That's the
Come
thing.
on.
I mean, to
We
hear
didn't
what
do that.
Parcells has to say.
I played in
just
the
messing with you.
NFL. I made millions of dollars.
Oh,
Good,
come
good
on,
for
come
you,
on.
Sage.
Don't
Good
give
for
me all
you.
that. Hey, you were out in San Francisco this last week. I was very jealous of that. It was like 5 degrees in Omaha.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing you out in the Bay Area look pretty nice.
I walked from my hotel to the stadium. It was like a half an hour walk, and it was amazing. 60 degrees and everything else. And I ate at Subway on the way, the rich man's meal. So by
the way, you know what who knows what that conversation is, right? With Zimmer and Parcells. But I mean, am I crazy to think the Vikings should look into drafting a quarterback in the first round this year?
Not at all. Not at all crazy, not even slightly.
And if it's you, do you draft the guy who has more athleticism and the ability to be more creative, and then you spend a year or maybe even two learning from like the executor, and then after you learn those basic skills, then you go, okay, now you have that ability to create and you have the ability to do things that Kirk can't do. Maybe that's we as you grow that quarterback, turn him into both an executor and a playmaker. He'd have a year to, I said, watch a guy who's got good footwork and good timing and good accuracy in those things, but naturally his God-given abilities would allow him to sort of bring this franchise to another level. I'd be very interested in something like that.
So here's the way that I lay out this debate in my mind that we're going to have all year long in the offseason about whether they should draft a quarterback here. I mean, first of all, there's the Kansas City model. And not only that, but the New England model. They drafted Jimmy Garoppolo to replace Tom Brady. Brady just kept defying time because he's an alien and winning. So they had to eventually move on from Jimmy Garoppolo and get a draft pick back from him. But it was their plan too. They were still in their winning window, and they drafted a second-round quarterback who was supposed to take over for Tom Brady. And also, of course, the all-time example is Aaron Rodgers being drafted behind Favre. So this is not uncommon at all. But with Kirk Cousins, I look at it this way, that you're going to have 7-9, you're going to have 8-8, and you're going to have your seasons where it's better than that, where things go right and you have great players playing really well and you have health and you have some luck and everything else. And this, in my mind, was one of those years where everything lined up with the system, the play caller, the running back. He was healthy most of the year. And you sort of circle those peaks. If it was a chart, that you'd have your little downs, your little ups with Kirk, your 7-9, your 8-8, and then you have a little spike. And that's your chance. Those are your chances to potentially win the Super Bowl. And if you sign Cousins to a 5-year contract extension, you might get 1 or 2 spikes. If you draft another quarterback and develop them, you might be horrible and it might blow up in your face and it just might be the biggest disaster. Brandon Whedon or Jamarcus Russell or Brady Quinn or whoever else might show up here, or Christian Ponder would be the obvious example, and it might ruin your franchise. Or it might be a guy who develops into, like you said, someone who's a special type of athlete, and most of the quarterbacks who are coming out now are. I mean, even Joe Burrow moves around really well, and Tua, assuming that his hip turns out to be all right and fully heals, he can move around really well and make plays. And then, next year, you're not getting Trevor Lawrence next year, but I mean, my God, look at him take off and run for 60 yards. So I think that almost all the quarterbacks are going to be out there. Yeah,
Justin
that's right.
Fields will be coming next year. By the way, both trained by my good friend Ron Veal, a part of my quarterback collective group in the Atlanta area. He has been training those guys since like middle school or something. Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields, and next year they're both going to be, I imagine, top 10 draft picks.
So if you're looking at this year's crop, there aren't many great quarterbacks outside of the top 2, but we say that all the time. And sometimes second rounders turn out to be very good quarterbacks. But there is the potential that it falls apart entirely, this plan to transition from Kirk to the next guy. But I also think that the possibility exists that you do have someone who's more dynamic, who can make up for some of your issues, that you would be looking at a more athletic quarterback and someone who maybe has some questions about accuracy or something like that, but has a playmaking ability. So you draft them in the second round and then plan to develop, or you draft them in the first round and plan to develop them, because obviously you don't have a top 3 pick. So Tua is probably not going to be your guy. I think a lot of people take the mystery box as opposed to knowing that with Kirk Cousins, you're going to have a lot of seasons basically like he's had in his NFL career so far.
So the real question is, though, is as we talk about Kirk and will they replace him at some point, or somebody that is more athletic? That's what's so interesting about NFL stats, isn't it? Where you have he's the 4th best quarterback in the league and statistics here and touchdown to blah blah blah. And
Yeah.
and the question is, is he making his team better, his offense better? I mean, you watch those games yesterday. You watch that Seattle and Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson going back to back, and it's like, man, these guys are making things happen time and time again. And you're raising the level of the play of the players around them, and the Vikings don't get that. So there's sometimes it just sort of feels like there's a ceiling there, unless you have just a completely dominant, Trent Dilfer Ravens scenario where teams just your team is just so good you just overwhelm the other team, and that's really really hard to do, and that's not how the Vikings are going to win a Super Bowl. So who knows what that scenario is. I like, Aaron Rodgers is in Green Bay because he fell in the draft, right? I mean, the Packers had no interest in moving up to 15 and getting him and thinking, oh, this guy's going to be one of the greatest of all time. You'd think you'd move up in the draft. They didn't really realize what they had going here. They had him probably as a mid-first round pick or something. They really liked him, but not enough to actually give up much draft capital to go and get him. And then he ends up being one of the great quarterbacks of all time. So, if they have a pick, which is going to be, you probably know the numbers, it's going to be like 25.
Yep.
So if some player they really love drops to 25, sure. Will that happen? I don't know. I mean, there are some interesting quarterbacks in this mix. Most quarterbacks now are really good athletes, these college guys now, with all this spread stuff. So you don't have a lot of pocket passers. And so, could Tua or somebody that they just love fall that far? Who knows what happened, but it's not going to be a guy like Jake Fromm, who's I just see sort of as a pocket passer. And they're not going to be able to get, I don't think they'll be able to get Joe Burrow, who's going to be right at the top of the draft.
Mm-hmm.
And Justin Herbert is an interesting guy. Everyone loves him because he's 6'6", 225, and he's fast.
I'm not a huge fan.
I'm not a fan. He just seems to throw a lot of fastballs. He looks everything that Carson Palmer is, but with a bit better athlete. But I'm not seeing it. I'm just not seeing that he could be a great quarterback. He's one of those guys I think somebody will draft too high and not be a great player.
Totally agree.
But I guess
they'll be wowed by his hand size, which is how you got drafted, so you can't be sad about it.
Hey, it's the way it works. I'll take it. I'm glad they're not. I'm glad they're not. They were drafting pocket passers back then who had low athleticism for some upside. So we'll see what the Vikings. If one of these guys falls to 25th, Jacob Eason or there's a kid from Wake Forest that people like, Jamie Newman. So there's going to be some players there, but we'll see how much the Vikings fall in love with these guys in this pre-draft process.
Yeah, I think that's the number one by far conversation of the offseason is, do you lock in Kirk or do you try to draft somebody else and move on and use all that cap space, which is the biggest thing that you have to remember about it, is that you'll be able to spend around that person like crazy. So
the question is, what do you think that ceiling is with him? Is it possible for this team to win a Super Bowl with Kirk Cousins, or is it just sort of seem like it's going to be a lot of 10-6s and 9-7s and maybe a playoff win, and that's just sort of the ceiling? And if that's it, you play to win the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
That's just the deal. You play to win the Super Bowl, and sometimes you go for broke a little bit, and you end up going 5-11. You go, last we could have been 10-6 with the, but could they ever be one of those teams that's 14-2 with this quarterback? Yeah. I don't see it. Well, I haven't seen it in 2 years.
So that's the thing, is that I felt like this year they had the talent and they had the coaching to be one of those teams, and the fact that they weren't, well, I mean, that might tell you the answer. They had the health, the coaching, the quarterback play in terms of your statistics, but not showing up when you needed for him to show up most, outside of one playoff game in New Orleans at the end of the game. But he put them in a situation by no showing in Chicago, Kansas City, and Green Bay twice put them in a situation to have to go the hardest road. And I think that's where you're going to be pretty often if he's your quarterback. And then you've got to pull off something magical in the playoffs, which is just too much to ask,
By
honestly.
the way,
So
I do see the Vikings if they were a 1 or 2 seed. They were 13-3 or 12-2, and they were playing San Francisco at home this past weekend. I think they win.
totally agree.
I
Yep,
think they win.
totally
I
agree.
think the Vikings at home, it's a touchdown difference or so. And then having the bye week and those types of things, I think they win at home. I
Yep.
mean, they didn't get blown out in that game. I know it was a 17-point game or whatever it was, but it was not a blowout. It was very competitive. It came down to some plays here and there, and there's a turnover here and there, and obviously there's a drop punt and all those different things. I mean, this was not. The 49ers I know they're the 1 seed, but this was not like just they were dominating everybody. They just sort of ground out, their 13 wins and won a playoff game with their quarterback throwing for